Uh, okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So my name is Robbie, and I am the director of education here at PocketLab. And then also on the Zoom line here is Clifton, and he's the founder, co-founder, and CEO of PocketLab. And so I'm going to be doing the main kind of presentation today. Clifton will be here to answer questions via the chat, and then so any questions you have throughout, just send them into the chat window that you have there, and then either he can answer them directly, or he may just wait to answer them until we get to the end, and he'll ask we'll do a Q&A, and he'll read off some questions from the chat, and we'll address them together. And so today we're going to be talking about PocketLab Notebook, which you can see here on the screen share here. And I have my PocketLab Voyager connected inside this paper bag. I'm squeezing the paper bag, and you can see the pressure is, this is measuring, the PocketLab's measuring pressure, so you can see that change. And so we're going to learn more about how you can use PocketLab Notebook to collect data and investigate scientific questions and do labs, whether you're doing this in the classroom, which might be next year for some of you, or whether you're doing some type of remote learning with your students. PocketLab Notebook can be a great tool for that. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. I'm in my house. Clifton's in his house. Many of you are in your homes because of the circumstances that we're all in. And here at PocketLab, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're down in San Jose, so we're in a shelter in place, as many of you are across the country. And my wife is a doctor, and she's at the hospital right now working. And so my 3-year-old is in the back watching some educational TV during this time. And so he may, he's already on the screen. He may pop up. And so just bear with me on that. And you may also see my dog walk around, and who knows what might happen. So I appreciate everybody bearing with us on that. We are still, PocketLab's, the whole PocketLab team is still working and working to support you all. So just from our home. So if you have questions, we're here to answer them still. Send us an email, and we can set up phone calls. We're still here and available to help you guys out. And then one thing I'd like to say to all of you is that most of you are educators on this webinar, and I just want to say we really appreciate all that you are doing right now in this very difficult time as your schools are closed. And just from chatting before we got started, seeing all the different things that you're asked to do, kind of that you've never maybe done before, from remote learning to all kinds of stuff, it sounds like, and upending the plans that you had for the rest of the year. And so I know that can be very difficult. And so thank you to everyone, to all you educators out there working so hard to find a way to make the best of the situation. And our teachers aren't appreciated enough. So we appreciate you, and we want to support you in any way that we can. And so this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about how to do some of these, how to use PocketLab Notebook, and then also we're going to also talk about how you can use it in in these remote settings that many of you find yourself in. Just to go ahead and get started here, welcome to our webinar. As I go through this webinar, I'm actually using our PocketLab Notebook software to do this presentation. So this is what's called a lab report that you're seeing in front of you. And I've just added a bunch of my slides as images, so you can see that I'm using PocketLab Notebook here, this lab report, in this presentation as we kind of go through it. Our agenda today, I'm going to talk quickly about our mission at PocketLab and a quick overview of all the different things that we do here at PocketLab. And then we're going to talk specifically about PocketLab Notebook. And the basics of getting started and what a lab report assignment is and how you can use that in your classroom. And then at the end, we're going to specifically look at PocketLab Notebook for remote learning, how you can use Notebook in the different settings that you may find yourself in this spring. And that includes things like using big data sets, public data sets, creating example data for your students if you have a Pocket Lab and your students don't, and then using some tools that we have in our software like bar charts and scatter plots, etc. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just in here. Our mission really quick at PocketLab is we believe science and authentic data collection should be fun, engaging, and accessible for all students. So we make our products, we try to make them easy to use and intuitive so that students can engage with things like data collection and data analysis and planning investigations in order to expand their knowledge in science. And we make sensors. So this is a PocketLab Voyager. For those of you who aren't familiar, it connects to our PocketLab software where you can collect data using the sensors inside one of our devices here. So we have a couple of different sensors, and those connect to Chromebooks, Windows 10 devices, Macs, Androids, iPhones, iPads. So whatever you have, you can connect a PocketLab sensor to and use our PocketLab Notebook software with. We're also going to talk about, if you don't have a PocketLab, how can you still use our software? Or if your students don't have a PocketLab at home, how can they really use our software for some really cool lab activities? So quick overview of our two main sensors that we have. We have PocketLab Voyager and PocketLab Air. We have a couple others as well. PocketLab Voyager is our main one for physics and physical science, chemistry, engineering, and more. It measures things like motion, position, velocity, magnetic fields, temperature, altitude, barometric pressure, weather conditions. You can do all that, measure data in real time with the sensor. And then PocketLab Air is really great for environmental science, biology, citizen science, etc. It's got chemical gas sensors in there. So with this device, you can go out and measure carbon dioxide, ozone, so you can look at smog, particulate matter, and then weather conditions. So this can be really great for doing citizen science, environmental science activities, and looking at air quality. Mostly today, we're going to be looking at, we're going to use PocketLab Voyager just for the most part. And then these sensors connect with PocketLab Notebook. And so right now I'm in PocketLab Notebook. You're looking at what's called a lab report as I'm doing this presentation, and the sensors can connect into PocketLab Notebook to record data for that. So we'll go ahead and get started and kind of show you the basics of PocketLab Notebook. Right now, I am in our PocketLab Notebook software, and this is just running in a Google Chrome browser, and I'll show you how to get to that and access that a little bit more later. But basically, you would just go to PocketLab.com/app, or if you go to our homepage, you can, there's a button that says app, and you click on it. And for those of you familiar with PocketLab or have used some of our other apps in the past, this may look familiar. There's just some big buttons up here that allow you to connect to your PocketLab and begin recording data. So if I click this button that says connect to PocketLab and I turn my PocketLab on, I click on it, I click pair, and now I'm sending data from the PocketLab to our app here, to this graph. And so this is measuring acceleration. So as I move the PocketLab around, you can see the graph change. And I can switch to all the different things that a PocketLab can measure right within the app. So I click on this select graph button, and I can unclick acceleration and click on something like light intensity. And so now I can measure the changing light intensity, and I can record data. So I'm going to record some light intensity data as I cover the PocketLab, and just as an example to see how it works. And now I've recorded some data, and I'm logged into my PocketLab Notebook account. And now I can, and this is the first function of the first really cool feature of PocketLab Notebook, is you can click Save here and click Save to Notebook. And now that graph that I just recorded is saved into my account. And if you look down here, there's a bunch of different data of stuff. This was from earlier today when I was doing a practice webinar here. This is data from last month, which seems like 2 years ago. So there's a place here in PocketLab Notebook where you can just take your PocketLab sensor, record and save all your data trials in a real simple way, and it's all there in one place for you. I can then do something like pull up my phone, log in, and access all of this data that I've saved here. So for those of you that are using PocketLab sensors already, this is a great tool as a way for you to collect and save data and keep it all in one place. And you can go back and interact with these graphs dynamically. So that covered a lot. For those of you unfamiliar with PocketLab, we have a lot of tutorial videos and there's some more in-depth explanations of how all that stuff works on our website. So if you're if you're a teacher in your classroom, and the way that you normally would probably do labs is you have some way of collecting data, and that may be with a PocketLab sensor or another sensor or a stopwatch or whatever, and the students would do some type of data collection, and then they would take out like a physical notebook or maybe a worksheet, and they write, they open it up and they write their hypothesis, they draw a picture of their graph, they write out their conclusions. They're maybe working in a lab group, and then they finish up, they close their notebook, they go home, or they come back the next day, they turn it in, and now you have if you're a high school physics teacher or a middle school chemistry teacher or whatever, now you have 90 lab notebooks, 150 lab notebooks that you have to go through and grade and look at and all that. And so many of you have maybe different systems for that. But with PocketLab Notebook, we want to replace this in some ways, so that students can do their entire lab report within PocketLab Notebook. And then as a teacher, you can go in and you can see their progress. You can monitor their progress. You can give them feedback in real time. You can grade what they're doing in real time. They get that feedback quicker. They can make adjustments to what they're doing. And there's just a faster turnaround in terms of assessing your students and helping them along with their lab report. And not to mention, it's easier to create, or we're trying to make it easier to create content to give to the students, like lab assignments and et cetera. So where does that all start? Well, if you go here to this place that says Lab Report Library, I'm going to show you how to get started with a lab report. So we were looking at a lab report earlier with those slides. If I go over here, it says Create New Lab Report. I can click on that and start a new lab report. We're going to call this light intensity. And I open it up. And so this is a lab report. As a teacher, I want to create an assignment now that I can send to my students that are in my classroom. And I'll show you how the classrooms and stuff work a little bit later. But right now what I'm doing is I'm trying to create this assignment for my students. And so here on this little toolbar are all these different things that all these different cards that you can add to build out your assignment. So I'm going to start with a text card. I'm going to add this, and I'm going to call this investigation question. And I'm going to ask a question to my students, which I'm going to do this really simply as, how does the light intensity change when the lights turn on and off. So that maybe would be pretty obvious to us, but just as an example. You can then do things like add a question card, which has a little place for the students to answer a question. And so I'm going to call this hypothesis. And I'm going to say, make a prediction to the investigation question. And when you assign this to students, they're going to be able to click answer and put in their answer into that text box. So you can see that you can actually now create some questions and some text for them to read and work through a lab report. You can also add images. So when we were looking earlier at the presentation that I had added images from a slide presentation. So here I'm adding an image about light intensity falling off at the square of the distance. So I might call this diagram. And then you can add videos as well. So, and I meant to have this pulled up, so sorry about this, but you can add a YouTube video. So if this loads, we'll just pull something up there. Okay, so, and I might call this background information. Okay, so you can see now as you're creating this assignment, you're building out something that's a little more dynamic than just a worksheet, because now students can watch videos, they can look at images that you've added, they can kind of dynamically answer questions. And then you can add, here I'm going to add just a procedure here. So I've already written this out, so I'm just copying and pasting a procedure for them to follow. And then I'm adding this collect data card where they could actually then, within the lab report, click on it and connect to their PocketLab and record data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to record some data and save it into this lab report, and then it'll be example data for the students to look at. So I'm going to switch to light intensity again. And this can be a way, if you have a PocketLab, but your students, you're doing some remote learning, your students don't have a PocketLab, you can actually record data and save it into your lab, into the lab assignment, and then they will see that data and they can then analyze the data that you record as well. So I'm just going to record some data here as I turn on and off the lights. And then I'll save that. And I can call that example data. And so now I have, here is this lab report assignment that I've created really simply by adding all this content. And now I can assign that to my classroom of students. So I can assign this to a class, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead and show you. I've already set up a class and assigned. I kind of wrote up the same assignment earlier and assigned it to a class. So just in the interest of time, we kind of fast forward. But I could assign this to a class, and I'll go to that class now. And again, I'll kind of cover about how to create classrooms and stuff at the end. So if I go to example classroom, I can see this. This is this light intensity assignment that I just created and then assigned. Let's say I assigned it to my students. And I can see the progress of the students as they're working through this lab report. And I will show you what it looks like from the student perspective here. So if you notice over here on the right, this is I'm logged in on this side over here as a student. I'm logged in as Catherine, and I'm working in a lab report with, in a lab group with somebody named Albert. They're in my class. So if you look down here, here was the hypothesis. Here is Albert's answer. Catherine wrote in her answer. Here's that diagram we looked at. As you watch the video, they click, and as they work through this stuff, they're clicking this little, the students are clicking this little checkbox here. It says mark is complete, and that's helping show the progress of the students as they're working through this lab report. So as students do that, you can be monitoring how far along they are in the lab report. And then here's that example data that we recorded. And then the students here can, just like we were showing earlier, can connect to their PocketLab, and they would do their own data recording of the light intensity as they turn on and off the lights. And I'll just kind of do that this way. And then they save that data, and I can title that trial 1. So now you can see there's data in here, there's videos, there's student responses to questions, and down at the bottom here, a student, Catherine, is going to write a conclusion. So she can add a text card as well and call this conclusion, and now she can write a concluding paragraph. And you can see over here on the left, as Catherine recorded some data, you can see this progress bar updates in real time as the students are working on it. So my hypothesis, and she would go ahead and write maybe a full conclusion. And then as a teacher, you can go over here and you can click see lab report. And so now I'm now looking at Catherine and Albert's lab report, and I can add in some comments, and as I kind of look through and grade it. So I'm looking at their hypothesis. Okay, I'm going to add a comment here that says add more details or something. So now as a teacher, I can give some feedback to them as they're working on it, and they'll see those comments pop up. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of how things all work from the teacher all the way down to the student. You can create lab report assignments. You can assign them to your classes. Students can then access them and work through these lab reports. You can see their progress. You can give them feedback. In these lab report assignments, they can connect to PocketLab sensors, or I'll show you this in a second, or they can collect data in other ways as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see here. I'm going to show you now how to set up your account. If you don't have a PocketLab Notebook Pro account, I'll show you how to get signed in and set up with all that. So I'm going to go ahead and log out of this student account. And if you don't have an account, this is how you'd get started. You'd go to the PocketLab.com/app, like I showed you before. There's a button in the upper right corner that says log in. If you click log in, if you have an account, click log in. If you don't have an account, click create an account. Might get interrupted here in a second, but if you click create an account, and then go ahead and create an account. It's free. And then once you have an account, it'll ask you to verify your email. You'll do that, and then once you have an account, you can sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in as my account with a new account. Okay, and now I'm logged in to what's called PocketLab, my PocketLab Notebook account. And this is a little bit different than what we were seeing earlier. That was PocketLab Notebook Pro. And PocketLab Notebook Pro has all of the features that you would need as an educator to create classrooms and create student accounts and assign lab reports to students. And so I'll show you how to get PocketLab Notebook Pro in a second. PocketLab Notebook, you can do things like make lab reports and collect your data. But if you want to set up classrooms, you have to upgrade it to PocketLab Notebook Pro. The way to do that is if you just click here on classes, you'll see this pop up, and there's a way to start a free trial. Or if you go over here and click on your profile, there's a button that says upgrade to PocketLab Notebook Pro. So the Pro version, we have a free trial that's normally 30 days, but to help a lot of the educators that are home and doing all kinds of different remote learning scenarios and things like that, we're extending that free trial through all the way through the end of the year, through at least July 1st. So go ahead and click Start Free Trial. It just starts automatically. You don't have to enter any like credit card information or anything like that. You just can give it a try. So if you want to use this PocketLab Notebook Pro in your remote learning setting, this is a great way to try it out. If you just want to play around with it and kind of create your own dummy classrooms and play around with fake student accounts to see if it's something you want to use next year, it's a great time to do that as well. So you just click Start Free Trial, and now that will give you the ability to add classes. So to add a class, I click Create Class, and then I would do something like so you can just fill in things like that. You don't have to, but and then now I've created a classroom, and so this is how you would set up your classroom with your students. You click on the classroom, and this is what a classroom page looks like. And I don't have any students here in my account yet. I'm going to click Add Students to add them. And when I do this, this is going to create accounts for students. So what the students need to log in is a class code and then a username. And so you create their usernames here, and it's really simple. You can copy and paste usernames from a roster. So if you have your roster, you can pull it off Excel and just copy and paste it right into here, or you can just type it. So all you have to do is put in their names on different lines, and it will create students for all of those student accounts for all of these different students in your roster. So you add that, and now all Albert needs to do, if Albert is in your class, all he needs to do to log into PocketLab Notebook is go to that login page and enter his class code and type in Albert E for his username, and now he can log in. I think some of you will probably ask about Google Classroom and one, I think it's called One Class, blanking for a second, with Microsoft. We have integrations with Google Classroom coming where you can just upload your roster from Google Classroom if that's what you're using really easily. It's not there yet, but it'll be there for next school year. So you can use the class code system for now to get started. Okay, I want to touch quickly on some resources that you can use right now if your students do not have Pocket Labs with them, which is probably many of you. Even if you have a class out of Pocket Labs at your school, all your students may be at home, and there's no way to get those Pocket Labs. So what are some ways that you can use PocketLab Notebook in some really cool and interesting ways with your students right now? Over here where it says, so I'm gonna go back to my lab report library. This is where you create assignments, like I showed earlier, to send to your students. So you can always create your own. And then over here, down here, it says resources. If you click there, there's a bunch of different resources, basically a bunch of different lab report assignments that the Pocket Lab team that we've created that you can add to your library and to assign to your students. So most of these, use Pocket Lab. if you go down here to the bottom, here's an example of one that we created last week that uses data, like publicly available data sets on, this specifically was looking at the 1918 influenza pandemic and the importance of social distancing. So we put together some content for a lab report that's very timely right now, obviously. We're going to continue adding new resources every week where you don't need a PocketLab to do the lab report with. And so there'll be some more coming next week that you can just use, but I'll show you again how this works. So if I click on this lab report, I'm now viewing this this lab report from the public library that we have here. And this is actually a graph showing the, maybe you've seen this, has been kind of in the news in different articles and stuff, but this is the death rates per 100,000 people in Philadelphia and St. Louis in 1918 during the influenza pandemic. And right about, I think it is here where I'm hovering over that data point. No, this one here, 14 days, so on September 28th, right here, Philadelphia held a really big parade, and you can see the influenza cases spiked and the death rate spiked after that. And meanwhile, St. Louis practiced some social distancing techniques like closing schools and churches and canceling a parade of their own. And so this is an example of how Philadelphia and St. Louis, the difference in social distancing, and St. Louis actually kind of flattening the curve like everybody's talking about. So this data set is here and loaded. Okay. Are you okay? You didn't hurt yourself. Okay, well, that's good. He says he didn't hurt himself, so thumbs up for that. So the way this, and I'll show you a little bit how we get this data in here in a second. But the students would read a little bit about the background of the of the 1918 influenza pandemic. There's a link to an article in the Washington Post, sort of showing how. Like with some really cool graphs about social distancing. So you can put in, there's some links in there. And then the students would answer some data analysis questions where they go back up to here and they just kind of have to zoom in on different parts of the graph and pull up the data analysis tab and look at some statistics and answer some questions based on that. So what you can do once you create an account is over here, it says view only. You can import this. You want to import this into your lab report library. And then you can assign this to your students. And they can then work on this. And there's no PocketLab required. Now, how do we get this data in there without a PocketLab? And this isn't obviously PocketLab data. That's because in these graphs, you can also just import data from a CSV file. So if you have data that you go out and find on something that you're curious about or something you want your students to investigate, you can actually pull in data from a CSV file, and I'll show you that here. So once you've imported a lab report from the publicly available resources, it's yours. You can edit it, you can remix it, you can delete stuff, you can add it. So here I'm adding a collect data card just to show you how this works. Instead of clicking connect to PocketLab, I can go down here where it says import data, and from a CSV file, and I don't know where that, I'm not exactly sure where that is on my computer. So, but what you do is you click on it and then you import a CSV file data, and it will, and that's what we did here to create this graph. And you can then label the axes, and there's a kind of a wizard that will help guide you through importing data from a CSV file. So if you don't have a PocketLab, you can still import CSV file data. Another thing you can do is this button here is called the data analysis card. If you click on it, you can add bar graphs, data tables, or just scatter plots where you or your students can enter data manually. So I'm going to click on that. And here is just a bar graph. And so you can you and your students can enter data manually here and change these bar graphs and add bars and categories and things like that. So there's some tools in here where if you don't have a PocketLab, you can add data through really simple bar graphs, scatter plots, and I'll show that really quick, the scatter plot. So here you can enter data manually into a data table, and then that data will show up here on this graph. So if you wanted to replicate, if you have a data set that you want your students to work on, you can import that as a CSV file, or you can add that into just a data set, and the students can then see that data. You can give them an assignment where they go out and look for data, and then they can enter that manually here. So over the next few weeks, every week we're going to have some different resources that we generate that don't use PocketLab sensors. And that way, for those of you that want to use this with your students right now, every week you can send them one of these labs or create your own. And so in a couple weeks, we'll have one where students can use their kitchen thermometers like meat thermometers to record some temperature data, input it into a scatter plot like you're seeing here to investigate some things about temperature. So those are just some examples of what will be coming. We're going to wrap up soon. So I want to just quickly go back here to the slides. And we'll take, I'll take some questions here in a second, but I just want to show a couple things here. So to start your free trial of PocketLab Notebook Pro, you just go to the PocketLab.com/app in a Chrome browser, click on classes, or sorry, create an account, and then click on classes, and you'll be able to start your free trial. And then if you have any questions, email us at support@thepocketlab.com. One other thing that we have coming up is we've put together what we're calling a Science is Cool unconference, where we're working with 10 other innovative science organizations, and we're going to present on a variety of topics on physics, life science, engineering, computer science, and we're going to talk about methodologies and lessons and things like that. And this whole conference is going to be on Zoom, so we'll be presenting a little bit in it, and then there's also going to be 10 other companies that are going to be companies and organizations that are going to be presenting, and so there's actually the conference is free to sign up to, and then there's also going to be some professional development credits available as well for that. So
Bobby,
go ahead. Yeah.
And there will be a keynote talk
Yes.
by Professor Robert Siegel. He's a professor of immunology and infectious diseases from Stanford, and he'll be talking on the biology of COVID-19 and explaining, what is a coronavirus? And you see all these pictures of this sphere with a bunch of knobs coming off of it. What is that image showing us, and what are those knobs, and how does this thing behave? So should be really interesting.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. So that's going to be a really cool feature of that. So that's on April 2nd at 9:30, and then just a couple other things. We have hundreds of free, hundreds of resources on our PocketLab Educators page. Not just the stuff you can use in Notebook, but just a lot of different ideas for doing science labs. So check that out as well. And then go ahead and there's some stuff on social media. I'm going to take questions here in a second. What I want to do really quick is just this whole webinar presentation. One thing you can do in PocketLab Notebook is you can share anything that you create. You can share with other teachers. So if you are come up with a really cool lesson and you want the other physical science teacher down the hallway or in another school to use it as well, you want to collaborate with them, you can create these assignments and then go up here where it says share, click share, and you get this link, and kind of just like a Google Doc, you just send that link. So I'm going to send this right here to everybody in the chat window. If you click on that right now, you can get this lab report, and it'll be as a kind of a read-only version right now, but then you can import it into your account, and that way you can check out all these links that are here. So if you do that, you can click on that link and learn more about the Science is Cool Unconference. And you'll also have direct links to our emails and all that stuff there. So check out that lab report that I just sent, which is this presentation. You'll have that presentation, and just think about that's an example of how you can really use PocketLab Notebook also to share collaboratively with many other teachers. Okay, I know that was a lot to go over, so I'll take questions right now, and then we'll go ahead and get going. So
so Robbie, I'll shoot them at you, and we got one request to show the login a little bit again, just to show how you start your free trial.
Yeah, good question. So let me go back here. Actually, so if you go to if you just go to you can start all the way back from our website. If you're on our website, there's a button here that says app. If you click on app, I'm actually logged in, so it'll probably log me in a second. Maybe not. Then, so you're on our app, and up here there's a button that says login. If you click login, then here where it says create an account, you can create a PocketLab Notebook account. It's about raptor eggs?
No, raptor eggs.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So you can create a PocketLab Notebook account, and then to upgrade it to PocketLab Notebook Pro, let me log in really quick. So now, once you create a PocketLab Notebook account, now you're logged in here, and if you click classes, that's a feature of PocketLab Notebook Pro. This pop-up will appear, and you just have to click Start Free Trial, and now you can start your free trial. So there's kind of two steps to it. One, if you don't have a PocketLab Notebook account yet, you have to create one by going to this website and clicking Login, and then click Create an Account. And then once you've created your PocketLab Notebook account, to upgrade to PocketLab Notebook Pro, you just need to click on Classes, and then there's a button that says Start Free Trial. Or you can go to your profile, and there's a button that says Upgrade to PocketLab Notebook.
Great. And yeah, if anybody needs further support, we're more than happy to help. We'll just follow up with an email to us.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple questions about what platforms are supported, what operating systems, what browsers.
Yeah. So good question. PocketLab Notebook you can use on any computer. So you can use it on a Chromebook, a Windows 10 device. So actually not any Windows. It's got to be Windows 10 or newer, and then a Mac or and an Android phone or tablet, and then
Linux.
And Linux, yes, you can use Linux for all the Linux heads out there. You can use Linux. All you need, you don't have to install anything. You don't have to download any apps or anything like that. You just you just have to open a Google Chrome browser. So you open a Google Chrome browser and you go to the PocketLab.com/app. And there's a link to that in the lab report that I sent as well. So you just go to the PocketLab.com/app, and that will bring everything up. But it does have to be a Google Chrome browser if you want to connect to connect the PocketLab sensor, because Google Chrome supports what's called Web Bluetooth, which is the ability to connect a sensor right into a web browser. And not all the other web browsers support that yet, but that is coming soon. So for now, you have to use a Google Chrome browser. In the future, you'll be able to use any browser. But for now, Google Chrome is how you're going to access this. And then if you are using an iPhone or an iPad, there's just a PocketLab app that's a little different than this, where you can just record your data. It doesn't have all the lab report tools. And there's an integration coming so that you can connect your iPhone data that you're recording send it into your notebook account. Yeah.
Then there are a few questions about using previously saved data and getting that into Notebook. So there is a way to do that.
Yes. So one thing you can do is you can just import that data as a CSV file. And so if you go down, so let's say you've recorded data before with a PocketLab notebook, or sorry, with a PocketLab device, and you have that data saved like in Google Sheets or downloaded somewhere else, you have it as a CSV file. You can click here where it says import data, and you can upload that CSV file right into PocketLab Notebook, and it will recreate that graph just as it was originally when you recorded it. And so that's actually a new feature that was just added in the last month or so. So you can import CSV file data, and that's the easiest way to get data that you've recorded previously. It's also great if you have data that you record on your trials page and you want to add that to a lab report assignment, or you can do it that way. If you have an iOS device and you record data with your iPhone, you can send that data as a CSV file. You can save it as a CSV file and then upload it into your notebook account. So use that import data feature there.
There's a question about students sharing data when they share the PocketLab device. Not sure I totally understand the question, but yeah, there is lab group sharing. So Robbie, maybe you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so let's see, I'm not in a lab group here. I don't think might not be logged in here anymore, but you can see that Catherine and Albert were in the same lab group. And so I didn't really show this in too much detail. I kind of went over it really quickly, but you can create lab groups so when you create an assignment, you can create a lab group to send the lab report assignment to lab groups, and students can then collaborate on that. Or you can send the lab report to students individually and they work on their own. If you create a lab group, then as students are recording and saving the data, they're all seeing that data. If they're all logged in different locations, for example, they would all see that data once it's saved. So for example, if Catherine here records data, which I was showing earlier, she records that light intensity data, she saves it. If Albert is logged in, he'll see that light intensity graph that she just saved. He'll see that pop up. So depending on what if you're in class, you might have 4 students all at a lab table, and maybe they only have one Chromebook up and they're recording data together, and Catherine's logged in and she's recording light intensity data. They're working as a group to record it. That data is all saved, and then they go home, they pull up their devices, they log in, they start working on their lab reports, and they all see that data that was recorded together in class. If you're doing something remote, where Catherine happens to have a PocketLab sensor, she can save that data, and then Albert can still see it. So in anything that they're working on collaboratively, they'll be able to see. I don't think I'm logged in anymore. Yeah, so it won't show up. But I think that answers the question. So if they're in lab groups, yes, they can share data. If you assign it individually, they don't share the data.
Well, awesome. I think we addressed most of the questions.
Yeah.
There's one more. Do students in a lab group see what other students are writing later? Um,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. There. Yes. But there's a couple. So good question. There's a couple ways that you can sort of create part of the lab to be something they work on collaboratively, and another part of the lab to be something they work on individually. And we're making some tutorials on how to do that exactly. So I can follow up with the person who asked the question specifically with that later if you want more details. But essentially, you can create the same lab report, but you can create like a part 1 and a part 2 and assign both of those to the students. So part 1 would be all the work that they would do collaboratively, and then part 2 would be all the work that you want them to do individually. And so they would get like both of those, so they could work on the collaborative part together, and then they could once they're finished, they could go over and work on the individual part together. And so there's a way to do that that way, if that makes sense. And I think I saw a couple people asked about Google Classroom. I mentioned this again, not yet, but we have an integration with Google Classroom that we're working on right now, where you'd be able to connect your rosters and accounts, student accounts, to create rosters in your classroom.
Yeah. Well, Robbie, I think you hit them all.
Yeah, and if there's any other questions or anything comes up, just send us a message, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody individually, set up calls or anything like that if you guys have any further questions. So yeah, email us at contact@thepocketlab.com. That's there in that chat window. Any questions we didn't get to, anything that comes up later, send us an email, and we're happy to help in any way we can. So yeah, thanks everybody again for taking the time to come by and check this out. I know it's a difficult time for everyone, so we appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again.
Wash your hands.
Yeah, wash your hands.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.